Hello, this is National Master Daniel Johnston, and this is the first video in my series on chess fundamentals. I'm creating this series because I realize that when I work one-on-one with students, there are several lessons that I tend to give them in order to build up a foundation for their chess. And I think that uploading these videos here should be a great reference for a lot of players to start building those foundations for themselves. So, who are these videos for? These videos are for players who have been playing chess for a little while, maybe for a long while, and they're looking to get to the next step of their game. So, this is for beginner to intermediate players. Some of these concepts for total beginners, it might be a little bit complex at times, it might be a little too easy for more advanced intermediate players, but I would say basically from, let's say, about 500 to 1600, I think can get value out of this series because chess is really about doing a few key things really well. Of course, chess is very complex and there are many things to it, but if you can just do a few things very well, then you can actually get to quite a high level. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about attacking the king, and this is based on a lesson that I've given a number of students, and I'm going to show several games, several classic games from two from Paul Morphy, as well as a puzzle from a game by Paul Morphy, as well as the Immortal game by Adolf Anderssen. So hopefully after this video, you'll have a better sense about the importance of king safety and how to take advantage of an open king. And hopefully these games will not only be instructive, but also aesthetically pleasing, because these are some of the most beautiful games in the history of chess. So here's this first game, and I titled it Protect Your King, actually, because black certainly does not do that in this game. So e4, e5, knight f3. So far, all of this is standard, and now f6. So obviously, this is not what usually is played. Usually black plays knight c6, then we have bishop b5, this is the Ruy Lopez, or white could play bishop c4, this is the Italian game, or white could play d4, this is the Scotch. Black could also play a move like knight f6, or even a move like d6, although I think that's not so good. But the important thing is these moves develop. They bring pieces out rather than pawns. And this move, not only is it a pawn move, but it's opening up the diagonal to the king. So this is quite a risky move. There's a famous saying, never play f6, because you're inducing a weakness to your king here. And also, if you want to castle short, castle kingside, this diagonal also becomes weak. So this is a very risky move to play. And not to mention, you're also taking away this f6 square from the knight that probably would want to go there. So yes, you are defending the pawn that was attacked by the knight, but this is really not a very good way to do it. So actually, even though it's only move 3 in the game, white can already start an attack on the king. And I'm going to now introduce another concept, which I'm going to talk about again and again, which is that whenever you're looking at a position, you should always look at three things first. First, are there any possible checks? Are there any possible captures? Are there any possible threats? And the thing is that all chess moves, they're not created equal. Like, if I make one move that's strategically not as good as another move, okay, if my opponent's super good, maybe they can punish it. But really, it's probably not going to determine the outcome of the game. Whereas if I make a move that allows my opponent to get a checkmating attack or just capture an extra piece, that's a much more important move to the outcome of the game. So those kind of forcing moves you really need to be particularly paying attention to. So here, there's no way to check the black king, but we can already capture this pawn on e5. So that's exactly what Morphy did. Knight takes e5, f takes e5, and okay, well, black didn't have to take the knight back, but black actually could have played queen e7, but okay, first of all, white could drop the knight back and then bishop e2. And this is already better for white because white's ready to castle and exploit the fact that black's king is still in the center. But black could still keep fighting on here. But a better move, well, we could have queen h5 check, attacking the king, and if, okay, queen f7, of course, just would lose the queen. King d8 would fail to knight f7, picking up the rook. It's a fork. And g6, this move stops the check and also attacks the queen, and white's knight is still under attack. So you might think that white is in trouble, but actually white can take on g6 here. And now black has two moves. Black could, well, three moves actually. Black could either take on g6, play queen f7, or play queen e4 check. So if black takes the knight, queen h8, and now white has won a rook for a knight. That's called winning the exchange, and this is an advantageous trade for white. If queen f7, now this is a pin to the queen, so if the knight moves, the queen will be attacked, and it looks like black is just threatening to take this knight. Well, white can get out of that with knight f4, which breaks the pin, and it also defends the queen. So if queen takes, now knight h5. Okay, but black could play the move queen takes e4 check, which is a bigger problem because now, let's say bishop e2 to get out of that, now queen takes g6. And now black has just won a piece. So this would actually be very good for black. So therefore, even though queen h5 is tempting, we saw some lines where after queen f7, or if black were to play something like king d8, then we're just winning. But actually, this is not so good. So what we should do in this case is simply knight f3, and then go for this position. And it may not seem completely obvious that this is winning, but black still needs 1, 2, 3 moves to castle, whereas white is going to castle next move, and this queen is also going to be attacked. So this is quite a bad position for black. Okay, so black takes the knight instead, and now queen h5 check. So again, black has two moves, g6 or king e7. So if g6, then, okay, what are the possible checks? Okay, queen g6 is a check, but then black would just take back with the h-pawn. So queen e5 is a much better check, because now we're forking the king and the rook, and we're just going to pick up material, so black can resign here. So king e7 was played. Now queen takes e5. King f7. And, okay, how can we develop with check? So we could have some checks like queen d5, queen f5, but you're not going to checkmate the king with just a queen. You need to bring other pieces into the attack. So that's one of the most important principles in attacking, is that you need to have as many pieces in the attack as possible. And therefore, white plays bishop c4 check, attacking the king. King g6, queen f5 check, and now we can actually bring in another piece unexpectedly into the attack. This bishop on c1 has been laying dormant all game so far, but now, after the move d4, we're discovering the attack against the king. g5. And now we can actually bring in yet another piece into the attack. So far we have 3 pieces that are targeting the king, which is pretty good, but it doesn't look like quite enough to checkmate on its own, does it? Because black also has these pieces that are covering some squares. But we can actually bring in this rook into the game. And again, we can do that with a pawn move, h4. And this is a brilliant move because now, after h takes g5, this rook is going to become activated. And then white is going to have 4 pieces in the attack, and 5 if you include this pawn. And that's simply way too many pieces for black to deal with. And you can note we could also take on g5, because after queen takes, now this bishop is hanging. And this also is, of course, extremely good for white, but is better to checkmate. So h4, and really there's nothing black can do because white simply has too many pieces. Bishop e7, hg5, king g7, and now we have checkmate in one, queen f7. And see, okay, this bishop is not really participating, but we have all these 4 pieces. Okay, actually, I guess you only really need these 3 pieces, but all of these pieces participated in the attack against the black king. So, in this game, you can take the lesson. You really do not want to open up your king that early, especially with pushing an f-pawn, because that's very risky. And yeah, if you get your king running in the middle of the board like this, that's very bad when your opponent is able to bring in all their pieces against it. If white weren't able to develop these other pieces, like it was just a lone queen attacking the king, then black would be fine because that's not enough to do damage. But having a multitude of pieces in the attack, that's way too much. Okay, so let's look at this next game. This is the Immortal game. So this is one of the most famous games ever played in the history of chess. So you may have seen this game before. Again, it was played by Adolf Anderssen, I think in something like in the 1850s. So again, e4, e5, but this time we have f4, the king's gambit. This is a sharp opening. It used to be extremely popular, not so much anymore. So ef4, black accepts the gambit. Bishop c4, developing, and now queen h4 check. So you can see white is kind of paying the price for not following our advice about not moving the f-pawn, because already the king has to move. If g3 takes, we already saw this kind of pin, and white is lost. So white has to move the king. But the thing is that white has compensation for that because white is about to develop the knight to attack this queen, and also this pawn moving. It actually is allowing white to have more influence in the center because this pawn used to be controlling central squares. Now it's over here, probably going to be captured at some point. So black is trying to get quick development as well. It goes b5. So takes, knight f6, attacking the pawn. Knight f3, queen h6, and now d3. So development is about equal. It's a pretty crazy position, but it looks like white is already doing fine. So knight h5. This is a bad move, definitely, because, okay, the point is that black is threatening knight g3. Let's say something like white just plays some random move. The knight g3 is going to fork the king and rook, and if captures, queen h1 would win the exchange. So that is no good, and white doesn't allow that. White plays knight h4, but still this is not such a good move because this knight, it's not really, you don't really want to put your knights on the edge of the board like this, because think about all those squares it would get. If, let's say, the board had a couple extra files, it would have other squares that it would be targeting, but it's not targeting those squares. So this knight it's only targeting 4 squares. So it, whereas the knight in the center, it targets 8 squares. So this knight lost half its influence by moving to the side of the board. So knight h4. And this is actually not a great move, but okay, this game was played almost 200 years ago, so obviously not every move is going to be up to modern standards. Queen g5, knight f5, and now c6. It probably would have been better to play g6, but that's not really the point. So c6 and now g4. So instead of moving this bishop, white responds by counterattacking against the knight. So black retreats the knight. And now white plays a very sharp tactical move, which is rook g1. And the thing is, white didn't want to just move the bishop back because this pawn could just be taken. And yeah, you can pin the knight, but the knight's just going to move out the pin with check. So rook g1, and okay, why can't black just take? Well, the reason is that this queen is running very short on squares. So white's just going to take this pawn, and now this black queen is actually trapped. And the only way to really try to gain squares would be to move this knight. But black is going to be just way behind in development. Now this knight is threatening to come to d5. White could... Okay, if start with e5, I was trying to get a double attack here, but then queen c6. So knight c3 is a better move. And yeah, black is up a piece, but it doesn't really matter because white has 5 pieces developed. Black only has the queen developed, which is just going to keep getting attacked. So black is actually completely lost here. So so that's why black did not just take the bishop. And instead what happened was, okay, rook g1. Okay, actually this is what happened in the game. So it would have been better for black to do something like in this position. It would have been better for black to do something like h5, and the reason is because after h4, now white cannot attack this queen with h5. So so in this case, white is not getting all this development against the black queen because black has stopped the advance of this pawn. So that would have been stronger, but black actually allowed this, and all of this happened in the game. Knight c3, and now bishop c5. So this is a very logical move, developing, which obviously black needs to get these pieces out, and developing with an attack against the rook. However, white does not actually care about this threat because white can gain time by attacking this queen. So this is where the game gets quite crazy. Knight d5. And you might say, wait, but what about queen takes b2? And this is what happened. And the thing is that now the bishop is threatening to take the rook on g1, and the queen is threatening to take the rook on a1. So it looks as though white is just in serious trouble because white is already down a piece, and now it looks like white's going to lose a rook as well. But the most important factor in this position is the black king. The black king does not have very many squares. Right now it only has 2 legal squares. Meanwhile, white has these 4 pieces that are primed to potentially attack the king. So therefore, white plays an extremely stunning move. Bishop d6. And, okay, this is actually not objectively the best move, but it's still a brilliant move. Just simply letting this rook hang, actually letting both rooks hang, because after, let's say, queen a1 check, king e2, black could even take this rook. However, that's going to be checkmate. If you can see, knight takes g7. The king has to go to d8 because now the f8 square has been cut off by the bishop, and now bishop c7. So that's pretty amazing, this position. Black is up 2 rooks and a bishop, but it doesn't matter because he's checkmated. And it's only these 2 pieces, these 3 pieces that are controlling the black king. And black's own extra pieces are actually blocking the king's way. So that's pretty amazing. So this is actually what black should have done, though. And instead of queen takes g1, black can play the very strong move queen b2. And this checkmating idea no longer works because the queen protects g7. And this position, it's still very complicated. White plays king d2, bishop g1, e5, which stops the attack of the black queen. And yeah, this is just a massive opposition, which is the computer says is equal. But black didn't play that. Black played bishop g1 instead. And now white plays the extremely strong move e5, the idea I mentioned before. And now you can see white is threatening to go knight g7 check, now that the queen is blocked by this pawn from defending g7. Knight g7 check is threatened, king d8 is forced, and then bishop c7 will be checkmate. And it turns out that black simply does not have a good way to respond to the threats. So here, knight a6. Okay, this loses instantly. But bishop a6 was trickier, because now if knight g7, now all of a sudden black is winning, because the king can run to c8, now that the bishop has cleared that square. And now the attack is over, and black simply has way too much material. But white can play knight c7 instead, king d8, and okay, queen takes a8 would be interesting after bishop c8, queen b8. But knight takes a6 is the strongest, because now if knight takes a6, queen a8, and checkmate. So bishop a6 would have been a better try, but still would be winning for white. But black plays knight a6, and now there is an incredible checkmate. So pause the video here if you want to try to find this checkmate. Absolutely beautiful. Okay. Of course, the first move is knight g7, king here, but now comes the stunning move. So if we can only attack this king, then it'll be checkmate, right? Because the king has no squares to go to. Unfortunately, bishop c7 doesn't work anymore because the knight defends it. And bishop e7 doesn't work because this knight defends it. So what we're going to do is use a concept known as deflection. Queen f6 check. Just a brilliant move, because now the knight has to take it, and the knight has been deflected off of this g8 square. So now this e7 square is wide open, and bishop e7 checkmate. So just an absolutely stunning victory. So just to go over it again, okay, we had this kind of crazy opening, not so important. But what ended up happening is white sacrificed a piece in order to gain development and time attacking the black queen. And that was very risky and actually just bad for black to go to, giving white such a huge advantage of development with their king wide open and still in the center. And white simply moved the pieces toward the black king, and with some accurate calculation, managed to deliver the checkmate. And although, let me show you, I mentioned bishop d6, black could have actually drawn. White could have played rook e1, which would have been stronger. Of course, this is not as poetic a move, because bishop d6, it looks incredible because you're just leaving this rook hanging with check. But rook e1 actually is better. And just playing something like this. If the bishop moves knight d6, and now bishop e5, you're threatening the queen and checkmate. And there's not really any good options. Like if black tries to develop, white can just slow play it, because white is now only down a piece rather than a piece and a rook as in the other lines. So white can just play more slowly and just let the development advantage tell. But an absolutely incredible game. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show you a puzzle from one of Paul Morphy's games. So if you look at this position, this is white to play, and black is threatening the white rook, and neither side really has too much development. But you can notice that black's king actually is in some danger because it only has one square to go to. So white could respond to this threat against the rook. However, there's a much better way for white to play. So pause the video and see if you can figure it out. It's going to take some calculation here. It might be a little bit tricky, but this is a forced, there's some very strong moves for white here. Okay, so the first move is bishop takes f4. So basically ignoring the threat. Black says, I want to take your rook. You say, I don't care, take my rook. Because you're developing this bishop. This development is more important. Because with the black king stuck in the center, after knight h1, okay, this knight is not really developed, it's out of the game. We have two pieces out. Black has none, and we're going to make some moves like queen e2 check next. Now we have 3 pieces developed, black has none, and black's king is in big trouble. So when we have a development edge against an open king, again, there usually is some tactical way to take advantage of that. So actually, it was a mistake. In the game, black took on h1. That was a mistake. Black should have played queen e7 check. And then simply bishop e2. And takes again would actually be a major mistake, because now bishop g5 and knight f6 is coming. And that's going to be very, very bad. For instance, queen here. And then check. If the king moves, knight takes c7 is checkmate. And if the bishop moves, then we just take it and then check. So you can see actually these 2 pieces just are completely destroying the black king and queen. So queen e7, though, even though knight h1, that would be a mistake, but black actually has a very strong move here, rook g8. So now if bishop g5, you actually will sack the exchange. So it's actually worth giving up a rook just to stop the attack of this bishop. But that's not really as important. Knight h1 is what was played, queen e2. And, okay, in this position, if bishop e7, you should be able to spot the mate in 2. Bishop e7. So again, look at all checks, captures, and threats. There are 2 checks in this position. Queen e7 is obviously not it, just giving up the queen. But knight f6 is very strong. Knight f6, king moves, and again, look at all the checks. Knight d7 is a check, but it would just get taken. Knight h7 is a check, it would just get taken. Are there any other threats? Are there any other checks? Well, it turns out there are. We can go bishop h6, and this is not only a check, it turns out it's checkmate. So you see, just by looking at checks, you can find some very strong moves. So queen e7 is better. And, okay, I think we have to go knight f6 here. And again, we just need to keep looking at checks. So there's only 2 checks here. Queen e7, this is no good, because now we're just down material, and we're not, with the queens traded, there's obviously no attack. And what about this check, bishop c7? Bishop c7, king c7, and there's another very strong check there. Do you see it? There's bishop c7, king c7, and now looking at checks, okay, queen e5 would just be terrible, just giving up the queen. Knight e8, well, now probably black could just go back. But there's another check, knight d5 check. And this is a fork of the king and queen. So the king has to go back, and now simply win the queen. Okay, objectively, maybe this position is only equal according to the computer, but we're about to win back this knight, have a queen for a rook and bishop, and a lot of double-edged play. But as I said, I believe in the game it was simply bishop at e7, and black just got checkmated immediately. So if you did see this bishop f4 move, definitely give yourself a pat on the back, because that's exactly the idea of this puzzle, is to take advantage of fast development, even if we have to give up materials sometimes in order to get our pieces out and attack the open king. Okay, so the last game is going to be another one of the most famous games in the history of chess, and this is the opera game. This was a game played by Paul Morphy, again, against a duke, and it's called the opera game because it took place actually as they were playing the game as they were watching the opera. So you have e4, e5, knight f3, d6. Okay, this is not such a good opening, but it is playable. So d4, and black plays bishop g4. This is already actually quite a serious mistake, and you're going to see why in this game. So black should take on d4, knight d4, knight f6, and black is doing okay. So bishop g4, d5, and black cannot actually take back because queen takes d8, king d8, and now knight e5, and white has won a pawn and is actually just winning already. So bishop f3, queen f3, d5. Okay, so notice what has happened is that already white has gained a tempo in development because white has one piece out, black has none, and white is about to bring out another piece. So bishop c4, developing a piece and actually threatening checkmate on f7. Knight f6, and that's pretty much the only reasonable move to defend against the checkmate while also developing a piece. And now queen b3. So this might look a little weird if you've heard not to move the same piece twice in the opening, but every rule has exceptions, and the point of this move is a double attack against b7 and as well as f7. Queen b7 and bishop f7 are both threatened, and there's really no good way to defend against that. So queen e7, and this is definitely not a move that black wants to play because it makes development for black even harder, because now this bishop cannot come out. And white could have played queen b7, but the thing is, after this move, black can trade queens with queen b4, and of course white is winning here. White is just up a pawn and still has a better position, but the checkmating chances are gone with queens off the board. So Morphy decided to avoid that with knight c3. So knight c3, and now c6. Black defends any potential knight d5 jumps and also defends this pawn. So very logical move. And now white develops another piece, bishop g5. And you can see again how much better white's pieces are than black's. It's going to take quite a while for black to get all these pieces out. And in fact, there's really not a lot of good options for black here because, okay, let's say they move the knight to d7, then white would take on b7, so that's no good. If knight a6, well, now you can take and ruin black's pawn structure. Maybe do something like castle, and black's development still is a big problem. Something like g6, then you could actually take, and now you decoyed the queen that was defending b7, now it's over here instead, so you can just take it, and then you're going to win the rook. And if maybe something like queen c7, now you just castle. So maybe, yeah, even bishop e7, that would fail to bishop f7. So black really does not have a lot of good moves here. And so black plays b5 and saying, okay, get that bishop out of here. So now f7 will no longer be under attack after the bishop moves. b7 will no longer be a weakness. So it's very logical. But with so many pieces out and the black king in the center, there's no reason to move the bishop back. You can actually do a very strong sacrifice. And that's exactly what white did, which is knight takes b5. And I was showing this game to some students, and they actually recommended the move bishop takes b5, which is also interesting because it's the idea of bringing the knight to d5. But the thing is that actually, okay, yeah, knight d5 would just lose the queen, but after queen b7, you're actually not getting such a good attack, because to get a check on the black king, you have to take on f6, and okay, this would be a mistake because of queen takes e4. So you have to take with the bishop. But now the thing is, white only has these two pieces attacking, and that's not going to be enough. So we don't want to have a situation where we have to be trading off pieces to get at the king. So it's much better to take with the knight, and now the bishop is immediately in position to attack the king. So knight d7, getting out the check. And now white castles. And now this rook is also in the attack. So all of white's pieces are in the attack, except for this rook on h1. Meanwhile, look at black's pieces. The three of them are not doing anything. This bishop is in a, or this knight is in a pin, and this knight is in a pin. So black's pieces are all either tied down or just out of play. So rook d8, okay, at least this rook is now doing something. But now this is simply a numbers game, because white has more pieces in the attack than black has in the defense. So now white can just start sacrificing. Rook d7, and now rook d1. And now white simply has the threat of taking on d7, because if the knight takes back, then the queen will be hanging, and there's simply no way to defend. So black tried queen e6, but now takes, and now this is checkmate in 2, so pause the video if you want to try to solve it. And again, just by looking at checks, you can figure this out. There are only two possible checks here. Queen e6, of course, would not be good because it's clear white has nothing here. But queen b8 is a fantastic move. Again, we've seen this principle of deflection a few times, because if we could just get this rook to d8 somehow, that's checkmate. So queen b8, deflecting the knight, and now rook d8, checkmate. So simply a brilliant game that took advantage of the lead in development and black's king being stuck in the center. So the key thing here is that white just kept developing, kept making moves that put pressure on black to defend. If white had just made a couple calm, normal moves, maybe black would have brought the rest of their pieces out and gotten in the game. But white, every move keeps bringing out more pieces in a way that black has to respond to. And black eventually gets so tied up, black completely tied up here, that that it just takes a couple accurate moves, this great sacrifice, and now this brilliant sacrifice to give the checkmate. And there's a famous saying in chess that tactics flow from a superior position. And the best superior position to be in for these kinds of beautiful, sacrificial checkmating tactics is to have a lead in development with your opponent's king in the center. So hopefully you remember that. Hopefully you learn some stuff from these games. I'd appreciate if you like and subscribe. Let me know any thoughts, and I hope to see you back for the second lesson.